Welcome everyone. We have teachers here from the ONSE schools. We have NBE3 teachers, that's grade 11 English Understanding Contemporary First Nation, Métis and Inuit Voices, and teachers from NAC10, the expressions of First Nations, Métis and Inuit cultures. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. I also acknowledge the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. The part of Toronto that I'm on is covered by an agreement between the Mississaugas of the Credit and Canada that is commonly known as the Toronto Purchase, also known as Treaty 13. Also on this land in the Great Lakes region, we're on Dish with One Spoon territory, and Elder Dr. Duke Redbird, who we are lucky to have with us today, sharing his teachings, we'll be talking at great length about the Dish with One Spoon. But it's one of the treaties that, as a resident here, I'm expected to uphold. Our agenda today, we've done the land acknowledgement. I will be inviting Tanya Senk to do a welcome to everyone. Then I will introduce Elder Dr. Duke Redbird. Duke will speak with us for about 45 minutes about the true meaning of a dish with one spoon. Then afterward, we'll introduce you to the UIEC team here and some of the people at the board level who support us. Then we'll talk briefly sort of about what each of those three groups are, ONSE, NAC10, and NBE3. Then we'll have an opportunity for a question and answer with Duke about his talk about Dish with One Spoon. So we're going to focus on that because we have an opportunity to have those conversations today. Any questions you have about ONSE, NAC10, or NBE3, those can be directed to Robert, Adrian, and I outside of this meeting time. We can talk about that, and then we'll do a closing and end the meeting in a good way. So I would like to hand it now to Tanya Senk. Tanya is the centrally assigned principal of Indigenous Education, the principal of Kapapamachakwe Wandering Spirit School, and the Toronto District School Board's board lead on Indigenous education. So everyone, let's welcome Tanya. And I'll take my screen share down here. So welcome, Tanya.
Thank you, Lee. I'll just wait for the screen agenda to go down. Okay, that's great. So I just want to say Tansei, Tanche, Ani, Sego, Bojo, Kiskia Tamoin, Kendaso and Kwe Indignikas. I'm Tanya Senk. I'm the I am Métis, Cree, and Saulteaux, which is known as the Three Sister Nations, and with family lineage to Cowessess First Nation and Red River Métis. So I'm happy to be here. And the Métis, Cree, and Saulteaux are known as the Three Sister Nations people of the Buffalo, as I had mentioned. And this was taught to me by Elder Maria Campbell, who wrote the book Half-Breed in the 70s. I would recommend that people do read that book. It's very important. And so I am going to say welcome to everybody. And we're very excited today to have Elder Dr. Duke Redbird with us. And it's wonderful. And he's going to share with us this time that we have together from his beautiful mind and his beautiful heart. And I just, like I said the other day, have to pinch myself, but in a gentle way, not too hard, just to say how appreciative and how grateful I am that we have the opportunity at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre to learn from Elder Duke Redbird and from his wisdom. And I want to say thank you so much, and Chi Miigwech, Elder Dr. Duke Redbird, for this opportunity to learn from you. And as we say, this is all about learning from Indigenous peoples and moving away from the trajectory of learning about Indigenous peoples. So thank you so much. And Lee, I know that you're going to do an introduction of Elder Dr. Duke Redbird. Thank you, everybody, for joining today.
So for the past 7 years, first as an Act 10 teacher, and then in my current position as an instructional leader at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre, I've had many opportunities to learn from Elder Dr. Duke Redbird. And it's one of the great benefits for me of working at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre. Duke has been sharing his insights and understandings with people for more than 50 years. He has worked in film and at City TV. He is a poet, a performer, and a Grammy-nominated songwriter. He has performed in Hollywood, India, France, and England, and has performed for Queen Elizabeth II during her Silver Jubilee visit to Canada. Duke was the first mentor advisor in the Indigenous Visual Cultural Program at OCAD University, and recently Duke has been sharing his teachings at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and was honored with the inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award by the Human Rights Film Festival. Today, Duke will be sharing with us a speech that he will deliver for Red Sky Performance as part of their Red Talk series tomorrow afternoon. And we're really honored to have him offering these teachings and these insights with us today. Duke, thank you so much for agreeing to share with us. And everyone, now I'd like to welcome Elder Dr. Duke Redbird, and maybe just to warmly welcome him, we can turn our cameras and mics on for a sec and applaud him in.
Miigwech, everyone. Thank you for those kind words, Lee and Tanya. It's an honor for me to be here and to have this opportunity to share with you some ideas that around the Dish with One Spoon treaty. So as many of you already know, I'm a performing poet and have loved all sorts of poems and nursery rhymes since I was a child. And when you deconstruct a poem, there's generally a hidden message. And this was true of nursery rhymes. They were written in the Middle Ages, and poets used them to spread news about the political events of the day. And it was often the only way that a community of oral culture people who were illiterate would get their news, and they would get it in nursery rhymes. And then by memorizing the nursery rhymes, they could tell other people, and the news was shared that way. So one of the hobbies that I have for my own amusement is reading nursery rhymes and seeing how they could be constructed and applied to the world we live in today. So with your indulgence, I would like you to share with me this hobby of discovery with a rhyme called The Cat and the Fiddle. Now, the rhyme goes something like this. Hey, diddle, diddle, the cat and the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran away with the spoon. Now, today's topic is not about poems or nursery rhymes, but rather a discussion about land acknowledgement and a treaty called A Dish with One Spoon. The cat and the fiddle nursery rhyme could be a metaphor for the world we live in today. And the economists who practice perpetual growth and led us to really a brink of disaster. The economists have led us to believe that perpetual growth produces the kind of over-the-moon happiness that the cow experienced in the rhyme. The dog laughed because he realized it was a sport that could be compared with a dish running away with a spoon. So in my talk today, I will describe a better way to live on this planet than to continue the fictional sport of perpetual growth. In the indigenous world, perpetual growth was never an idea. It didn't make sense to allow the fiction of perpetual growth to run away with a colonial delusional spoon. It made more sense for the dish to represent Mother Earth as a vessel and all life on the planet to represent the spoon. A dish with one spoon is an idea that was conceived by indigenous communities of the Great Lakes region and the northeastern portion of North America or Canada, called Turtle Island, long before contact with Europeans. It was a concept that was used to describe how the land could be shared to the mutual benefit of all its inhabitants. It was designed to avoid conflict between indigenous nations who were occupying the same territory and had access to the same resources. These resources were to be used in a spirit of cooperation and good intentions. Now, in order to explain what a dish with one spoon really means, we have to think of it in the context of which indigenous languages are framed. And that framing is what linguists call a verb-based language. English is a noun-based language that is described as being binary. It has opposites built into it, such as up, down, either or, right, wrong. Verb-based languages, on the other hand, are non-binary. They do not use words like either or why. They describe everyday phenomena with verbs rather than nouns. Take, for example, the word electricity. In English, it tells you nothing about the phenomena behind the word. In indigenous languages, electricity could be described in a variety of ways, such as a waterfall running along wires, or the flashing in the eyes of a thunderbird in the middle of a thunderstorm. Understanding the difference between noun-based languages and verb-based languages takes us to the origin of the treaty called A Dish with One Spoon. It's as old and as fluid as the very rivers that flow in the land. Keeping in mind that rivers may change course from time to time, but the concept of the river remains the same, which is water running through the land with a bank on both sides. A dish with one spoon had the same capacity for fluidity as the river and would change from time to time, but the concept was always the same: shared territory for the benefit of all, the land being a dish and the people being the spoon. There's one dish and one spoon, and definitely no cows jumping over the moon. Although the inhabitants living in the territory before the arrival of the settlers, since time immemorial, could be described as over the moon with happiness, but that wasn't the idea. When Europeans arrived and heard of this idea of the dish with one spoon, they immediately called it a treaty and assigned it a definition within the silo of a noun. And once it became a noun, it had the effect of being carved in stone, and the fluidity of the original concept disappeared. Once Latin-based binary language people introduced a noun form to indigenous verb-based thought patterns, the original meaning embedded in the metaphor of a dish with one spoon was lost. Nowadays, in practice, it describes an agreement between separate communities or nations that put parameters around the sharing of essential resources. Traditionally, for Native people, Mother Earth was a single dish. All living creatures were one spoon. And since Mother Earth is constant in her giving and perpetual in her birth, the expectation was to limit consumption so that enough is left for all of the creatures to share. Now, the world prior to contact is described beautifully in a quote that I want to read to you by the great indigenous leader and warrior Black Hawk during the War of 1812. The Great Spirit gave us a world that was composed of the finest and best land for our home and use. The woods and prairies teemed with buffalo, moose, elk, bear, and deer, with other game suitable for our enjoyment, while the lakes, rivers, creeks, and ponds were alive with the very best kinds of fish for our food. The islands were our gardens, where the Great Spirit caused berries, plums, and other fruits to grow in great abundance, while the soil, when cultivated, produced corn, beans, pumpkin, and squash of the finest and largest quantities. The Great Spirit created this land for the use and benefit of his children and placed them all in full possession of it, and we were happy and contented. Unquote. So, until approximately 4,000 years ago, all people who walked on earth could be called indigenous. Indigenous simply means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place. Our ancestors lived in a world that was a family of living creatures, including humans, who managed for the most part to live without greed or hunger. There was an intuitive interdependency upon the energy of intelligence and spirit. Consider the indigenous hierarchy of creation. It begins with Mother Earth, who is central to existence and sacred. Plants and vegetation come next, and they are also sacred because they heal us, they feed us, and many have psychedelic properties that inspire our imaginations with visions. The creatures, they are teachers. Since they've achieved their particular evolutionary ceiling, they guide us on our journey. And last but not least are human beings. Now, this is in complete contrast to the European hierarchy of creation, which puts human beings first after God, animals, creatures second after man, plants third, Mother Earth comes last. And along with the animals and plants, she is considered profane. In the past, indigenous peoples were informed by our symbiotic relationship with the earth. And our cultures always recognized that human survival depended upon this symbiotic relationship with nature. Our purpose was always to care for Mother Earth and to cherish her benevolence, knowing that if we took care of her, she would take care of us. We realized that a healthy, thriving Mother Earth is essential to the survival of all living creatures. And we organize our communities using the same templates that were embedded by the universe in the beginning. Those templates were biochemistry and biocircuitry as nature evolved them. In other words, we were guided by nature and responsive to it. Indigenous people understood that the human body is a replication of Mother Earth herself. It was from the earth and the information that she provided that we learned that our anatomy, organs and flesh included, were created in order for the body to thrive. We knew that we are human beings living in one biosphere with all other living creatures. We had been living in a miracle of creation in a symbiotic relationship with nature from the beginning of time. In other words, a symbiotic relationship with ourselves. Since Mother Earth is always mutating and evolving and always in a state of flux, this process has been passed on to Indigenous communities for generations who replicated Mother Earth. And as a result, we're also in a state of flux. Since time immemorial, Indigenous cultures have understood and nurtured the gift of keen insight. Keen insight can be defined as an intuition that has been sequestered in our blood memory over many generations that ensured our survival when triggered by our relationship to nature. The source of all Indigenous wisdom comes from the intelligent energy of creation that pervades everything. Therefore, Indigenous energy sources are spiritual, not carbon-based. Indigenous people traditionally live directly from the energy of the earth. The energy we used was freely obtained from the earth, the sun, the wind, water, geothermal heat. Our energy sources were available to everyone equally. And these included the energy of the waters to travel and sustain us, the energy of the wind to control our environments, the energy of the sun to grow plants and feed us, and the geothermal energies like hot springs to warm our homes and heal our bodies. Many Indigenous populations continue the tradition of following the symbiotic relationship with nature and the natural cycles of life, using and utilizing our human imagination, our capacity for invention and innovation, and creativity. Now, the best example of how Indigenous people used biomimicry in their symbiotic relationship with nature is when they cultivated food, such as bean, corn, and squash, using three sisters companion planting. In contrast to the European method of using domesticated animals and the plowshare to dig into the land, in fact, when Indigenous people first saw horses tilling the land, many were aghast that the sharp blade of the plow was cutting into the Mother Earth. Three sisters companion planting. That consisted of garden mound planting. No carbon dioxide is released from digging. It ensures the vitality of the soil from one generation to the next. A trinity of cooperation on the surface of the earth. Imagine, eh? No pesticides. The microbiosphere contained a diversity of organisms. Agriculture was self-fertilizing and self-propagating. In the Indigenous worldview, Mother Earth assigned plants the task of healing us, feeding us, and inspiring us with visions. We hold a great respect for plants. The plants are indeed our relations. They are us, and we are them, exemplified by the breathing in and out of our mutual existence with plants. Oxygen released by plants enters us through breathing, and we convert that oxygen and what we eat into energy. In contrast, each time we breathe out, we release carbon dioxide and water, which plants in turn ingeniously combine with a lot of sunlight to make their own food, and once again, more oxygen. We are in perfect symbiotic relationship with nature when we breathe each other in and out of existence. Leading scientists in the field of botany have recognized that indigenous cultures have maintained strong traditional systems of custodianship over plant relations to safeguard their knowledge and uphold the associated responsibilities for their use. Indigenous cultures have lived in harmony with the land and knew from time immemorial that their survival and sustainability depended upon this symbiotic relationship with nature. They focused on cultivating wisdom rather than establishing the concept of formal education. Wisdom that was embedded in every creature on earth. Wisdom is not available in technology. And technology cannot answer the last question that should ever be asked of anything. And it's an indigenous question. Is it wise? Technology can't answer that question. For the last 4,000 years, Judeo-Christian, Roman, Greco peoples have been driven to impose their will upon the geography and the environment that they inhabit. This is in strong contrast to the way indigenous peoples traditionally lived. Binary, Latin-based languages from Europe that separated the world into categories of either and or did not exist in the Americas. European languages create concepts carved in stone, so to speak, being in a state of one or two mutually exclusive conditions that causes the brain to perceive the world as separate and categorized and partisan. It is through binary biases woven into the fabric of a language that a child is directed towards separation, judgment, materialism, and narcissism, which, as we all know, can result in aggression and violence and bullying, not unlike the world we live in today. In a verb-based language world, concepts flow like a river. The language does not demand children question and judge everything based on an either-or bias, but rather encourages children to be compassionate, affectionate, empathetic, and social, recognizing the reality that all options, as in nature, are available experiences in life, a world that is human. An acronym meaning humble, utilitarian, magnanimous, abundant, and natural. HUMAN. Think about that for a second. Nature today is suffering an environmental crisis with many causes, and it's beckoning to us that it is time to enter into a period of restructuring, repurposing, and realignment of our values and consciousness. A dish with one spoon has been interpreted by the colonial powers not as a dish with one spoon, but rather as a dish with a knife and fork and no spoon at all. The crisis that we're in at this time of human history would not have occurred had the interpretation of a dish with one spoon as understood by indigenous people been distributed throughout the European world. Instead, the colonial powers distorted the wisdom embedded in the concept and placed the spoon with a knife and fork. In fact, in the earliest version of the nursery rhyme that appeared in England in 1765, the fork actually runs away with the spoon. And that could be indicative of the danger of letting technological forks run away with human spoons. Today's crisis is a result of excessive use of fossil fuels, coal, and nuclear power in the world. They are old technologies. They were delivered to us by European ancestors and are creating havoc on a global scale. They need to be replaced by new technologies, which ironically are the same energy sources that the indigenous people have used since time immemorial, namely the wind, sun, tidal waves, and geothermal energies. They are free and they don't produce pollution. It's time to expand our time horizons as well, from seconds and minutes to decades and far beyond. In the same way that conscientious individuals do not shoot arrows willy-nilly into the woods without knowing if there is anyone present that could be hurt, we must stop shooting arrows into the future of our children without considering their impact on future generations. The arrows that were released 250 years ago at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, they are just landing on us today in our woods. The pandemic and climate change are examples of how decisions in the past are impacting us today and will continue to impact generations well into the future unless we acquire the practice of long-term thinking. Indigenous cultures have a tradition of considering 7 generations into the future when making decisions in their communities. Chief Foreign Lions of the Onondaga Nation Haudenosaunee Confederacy is quoted as saying, "We are looking ahead as if one of the first mandates given us as chiefs to make sure every decision that we make relates to the welfare and well-being of 7 generations to come. And that is the basis by which we make decisions in council. When we make a decision, we ask, will this be to the benefit of the 7th generation? Well, the decisions we make today, we don't know the answer to that question because learning about Indigenous culture is one thing. Learning from Indigenous culture is a profound switch necessary that I believe could rescue humanity from certain annihilation caused by ideas that disconnected whole populations from the biosphere and from their fellow creatures on this earth. We need to remember that in the natural world, all other organisms are doing what we need to do, and that is build and design in a way that will ensure our progeny lives gracefully on this planet for billions of years. Therefore, first we must focus on regenerating our environment. That's very important. We have to do that now. We must restore, repair, and care for our planetary home that will take care of our offspring into the future. We do that, and we must do that by embracing love for rivers, mountains, ice sheets, and savannas, and reconnect with the long and life-giving cycles of nature. In order for us to become better ancestors to future generations, we can use tools that Indigenous people have used for generations. Those tools have been called the 7 ancestral teachings. They help to guide our decision-making processes and increase our understanding of Mother Nature and the world that surrounds us. If we think of it this way, the 7 grandfather teachings are wisdom, courage, respect, honesty, truth, humility, and love. Well, the way they can be applied in your everyday thinking is thinking long term. Well, that's wisdom. Being compassionate, that takes courage. If you set and uphold boundaries and parameters, that represents respect. Being transparent, that's honesty. And recognizing the natural order of life, that's truth. If we unite and collaborate, because we can't do any of this alone, that's humility. And if we make Mother Earth's happiness central to our own happiness, that's love. All of these characteristics of behavior applied to our everyday life are obeying the first law of nature. And that first law is to take care of the place that's going to take care of our offspring into the future. By living this way, we are beginning the transformative process of removing the arrows of the past from landing in the future. We will be incorporating the real meaning and spirit of a dish with one spoon, which is the sharing not only the land and its resources, but also the humanity within us as expressed through the 7th generational mindset. In this way, we become better ancestors than the ones that led us to where we are today. Let us covenant today with one another and with our Mother, the Earth, that our primary goal in life will be for the collective stewardship of this beautiful blue planet, and no longer for individual profit. And let us use our technology to connect with one another in empathy, affection, attachment, companionship, and intimacy as we were ordained to do when we were born. Put these ancestral teachings as arrows in our quivers and let's shoot them into the future, and thus ensuring our progeny will be well equipped to continue the first and only law of nature. That is to be born, reproduce, and then be birthed into eternity. I'd like to close my talk today with a poem I wrote called A Dish with One Spoon. And it goes like this. The indigenous nations welcomed settlers from across the seas when they arrived in their territories. Such beauty revealed before their eyes was beyond the settlers' ability to describe. In all the languages that the settlers spoke, there were no words that could evoke with any clarity a single thought that Mother Nature's splendor brought. It was from the indigenous tongues that they learned the language of the earth in all her idioms. Toronto from Takaranto. Trees standing in the water, a meeting place where small fish could gather. Nearby hills where alders grow, that was called Etobicoke. And in the autumn, before the winter snows, the passenger pigeons rested in Mimico. And to the west, where the great waters flow, the lake and lands were called Ontario. The eagle soars high with prayers for Manitou. The Mississauga peoples smudge and launch their birch bark canoes. Three sisters, corn, bean, and squash. The planting season has begun. Tobacco is offered, a gift to grandfather's son. Sage, sweetgrass, and cedar to grandmother moon. There is peace, joy, and harmony in the treaty lands called a dish with one spoon. Megwach. So thank you for inviting me here to speak with you today. I'm open for questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Lee. And thank you, everyone who has attended today's talk. Megwach.
Thank you so much, Duke. If people don't mind, let's turn our mics on and give Duke a round of applause again. Thank you, Duke. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Duke, I just wanted to thank you again for sharing this extremely powerful and rich call to action with us. I mean, I have, this is the second time I've had the pleasure of hearing this, and it's amazingly wide ranging. And I'm so grateful for everything that you've been willing to share with us today, and for the way that you're helping guide us toward the future. So thank you very much, Duke. I just wanted to let people know, at Duke's request, we have recorded this talk, and we're going to continue recording till the end of this session, just for people's information. And now, actually, I'd like to invite my colleague Adrienne Plumley to turn on her mic and camera and lead introductions of the UIEC and friends here.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks again so much, Duke. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to listen to you speak and very generously share your knowledge with us. So thank you again. I'd like to start some introductions with staff at the UIEC. We'll start with our amazing centrally assigned Vice Principal, Christina Saunders, who is also the Vice Principal at Kapapamachukwe Wandering Spirit School. Christina?
Tansayani Bojo, welcome everybody, good afternoon. I just want to say a huge chimigwech to Elder Duke for engaging us all this afternoon in this dialogue. I personally continue to be grateful for your guidance and continuous and gaining knowledge from your ancestral teachings. So chimigwech once again. So I am Christina Saunders, as Adrienne had mentioned. I am essentially assigned Vice Principal for Kapamachukwe Wandering Spirit School and the Urban Indigenous Education Centre. I'm Red River Métis Cree from what is now known as Territory 6.
We only got the first part of that, Christina. You froze a little bit on us.
Oh, I apologize. My internet is being really not good today. So welcome everybody. Thank you, Duke. And take it away, Adrienne, Robert, and Lee.
Thank you, Christina. Robert, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Adrienne, Duke, Marcy. I really appreciate being able to be here twice and take it in. As Lee mentioned, each time I hear, I learn something new and gain something new, and I really appreciate being here. Thank you. My name's Robert Drochet. I am Métis from Ontario and French. I am an instructional leader. I support elementary and secondary schools, and I support a lot with the NAC-10 program, and that's the First Nation expressions of First Nation, Métis, Inuit cultures. And I also work a lot in the arts, with the arts and French, special ed. Sorry, my brain froze there for a minute. Like I thought it was a Zoom freeze, but it was no, my brain. Adrian.
Thanks, Robert. Lee, is there anything you wanted to add to your introduction?
I'll just quickly add. So again, I'm Lee Shepherd. I'm an instructional leader with Adrian and Robert at the Urban Indigenous Education Centre. I'm English and Scottish ancestry, so I'm a settler, and I do this work in relationship with Indigenous people and hold space for Indigenous education as a settler. In I hope good relationship. I am a secondary teacher. I support the secondary ONSE schools with either Adrian or Robert. And I support the NBE3, which is the English Understanding Contemporary First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Voices class.
Thanks, Lee. We're also really fortunate to have the central lead teacher from the arts supporting us in some of the work that we're doing at the center. Erin Lucasen is here with us again today. We're so grateful to have you back with us. Erin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Erin Lucasen. I'm the new central lead teacher for the arts, and that's for kindergarten to grade 12. I've taught NAC-10 since it began, and up until about a month ago when I started this position. And so there's a lot of familiar faces, which is really, really, really nice to see. So I look forward to continuing to work with you and learn with you in this new role as well. And thank you again, Duke. That was a beautiful way to start this whole thing. So thank you.
Thanks so much. And I am Adrian Plumley. I'm one of the instructional leaders at the UIEC. I am Mi'kmaq from Eel River Bar and Listuchuk First Nations, Métis, Scottish, and Welsh. With Robert, I support elementary schools, and I also support portfolios in the early years, outdoor education, and library. I don't see anyone else here with us. So I think we will move on to the next piece of our agenda, which is providing some context around the courses and programs that you're all here from, ONSE, NAC 10, and NBE 3. I'll start us off by talking a little bit about ONSE. So ONSE stands for transformation. It's an Anishinaabe word, so transformation like a butterfly. The aim of the program was to contribute to a decolonization of current practices in schools which impede Indigenous student well-being and learning. The participating schools were selected based on data reflecting the highest number of self-identified Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students in those schools within the Toronto District School Board. In our first year, we had 5 schools that were a part of the program. So they were the 5 schools with the highest number of self-identified students. And then our phase 2 included 10 additional schools. So throughout the year, schools that are participating in ONSE with us will be receiving professional learning once a month, in addition to opportunities to work with Robert, Lee, and I as part of collaborative inquiry. Robert, would you like to share some information on NAC 10?
Sure, thanks, Adrian. So expressions of First Nation, Métis, Inuit cultures, also known as NAC-10 or NAC 10, is an arts, an equivalence arts course in high school, grade 9. So regularly, the teachers that teach in this course come together 5 times a year. They work with Duke, they work with Indigenous artists, they work with people here at the center to make sure that they're going forward in a good way to do the course. And so there are many NAC-10 colleagues on this call right now. It's great to see you. So this year we're picking it up again. Last year with work sanctions due to strikes and work to rule, and then COVID and learning how to navigate COVID world, things didn't happen as much as they could. So this year we are starting off and we're going to continue the work. And just to let you know that next month we will be doing a virtual tour together at the McMichael for the Christy Belcourt show. And I'll send information out later about that. And I look forward to continuing to work with everyone throughout the rest of the year. Lee?
So again, just the NBE3 course. It's a grade 11 English course focusing on First Nation, Métis, and Inuit voices and texts, including visual texts from Indigenous cultures, but also literature. And it's a substitution or an equivalent to the grade 11 core English, the compulsory English course. So this is the first year that we're offering NBE with the support of the UIEC. I know there are people here who have taught NBE before in their schools, especially NLC East and Kapapamachakwe. And so we are going to be doing some professional learning. This is the first of 5 sessions, and I will let people know what the next 4 will look like. But they're going to be about, of course, how to do this work in a good way, and also ways to center the work in Toronto, I hope. So I'm excited to continue to do this work with you. And again, thanks, Duke, for starting us in a good way. So we are going to now move in, I think, to the question and answers. So Adrian, Robert, and I will monitor the chat for questions that you have for Duke. We have just over 15 minutes left before the end of the session. So we'll probably do about 15 minutes of questions for Duke, and then we'll let you get back to your days. So thank you very much, Duke, for being willing to engage in this question and answer. And if anyone has any questions for Duke, let's put them in the chat. So we'll start with a question from Mike. Duke, have you ever published a book of your poetry?
Oh yes, yes. I have a book of poetry that will soon be distributed throughout the TDSB. It's brand new. It was going to be distributed to all the libraries and the schools in the TDSB. Actually, after the March break last year, and of course, pandemic shut everything down. So the book is all in our offices at the UIEC. It's going to be distributed to everyone, and it's a book of I think there's 140 poems, something like that. And each one addresses a part of the story of my own journey for the last 80 years or so. And I'm happy that the TDSB has decided to have it distributed in all the school libraries.
Thanks so much, Duke. I have actually a quick update on the books. They have made their way to Central Library, and they've all been cataloged for each school. So they should be heading out soon to school. So definitely keep an eye out at your school for that book to arrive from Tippett. We have another question in the chat, and I'll just remind folks that if you have a logistical question about something, we're kind of taking notes on those, and we'll email you after the session to answer those questions. So a question from Alexis, what's the #1 thing settler teachers can do to support Indigenous knowledge?
What's the #1 thing that
settler teachers can do to support Indigenous knowledge?
I think the most important thing is to actually begin to teach right from K to all the way K to 12 the presence and the history and the incredible contributions that Indigenous people have made to not only Canada, but actually to the world. And how Indigenous people throughout the world are responding to the idea of becoming or guiding people to become better ancestors. Because as as children learn these ideas that they're actually born with, the curiosity and the beauty of existence itself and the miracle of creation, and have the sense that we are not separated from nature as Europeans were taught, but that in fact we are nature, and that idea, if it can be distributed more amongst the children. Children nowadays are on their own volition. They are learning how to communicate on a verb-based language that they have created and invented themselves, without any input from the generation of teachers and the older generation. They are using a new methods of communicating, and they do it through acronyms like BFF, which is best friend forever, or a GIF, which is a visual verb, or through emojis and text. They mix it all together, and they're coming up with a brand new way of engaging themselves and the world that they live in. Learn that language and communicate with your students using a different way of representing themselves in the world in which they live, rather than by the binary notions of either or, which we have been using for so long, and doesn't really reflect the reality of the manner in which life is flowing.
We'll invite anyone else who has any other questions for Duke at this time. I ask this question respectfully and somewhat hesitantly, but a question students often pose is, how do the Indigenous teachings align with the conflict and alliances in warfare amongst First Nations?
Well, first of all, remember, none of this existed before contact with the settlers. The settlers introduced these ideas of conflict and war. We didn't have, think about the world before contact. There were no military organizations. There were no political organizations. There were no castles. There were no temples. There were no churches. There were no financial institutions. There were no money. There were no universities or schools or even writing. The whole notion of conflict and war and battles was introduced by the settlers. It wasn't a part of the Indigenous worldview. The Indigenous people were living in a dish with one spoon. So when they were being attacked, they had to take upon themselves, in defense of their territory, some of the methodologies that were being used against them. But that happened after contact. And so there's no having to negotiate an idea that was introduced by settlers to the indigenous people. Indigenous people weren't attacking anybody. Indigenous people were welcoming. Let's get the history straight once and for all, and stop distorting it in our history classes. Indigenous people welcomed these settlers. You go take a look at it, even if you go back to Columbus, in his logs, he wrote that these people he met, he called Indios, Dios, from God, Dios being God, in from Indios. He thought they were children from God, Indios, that's what he called them. And indigenous people are still called that in Spanish speaking countries. There was the notion that we had armies or that we were attacking people or we had conflict. We didn't even have the horse. We've got to start getting rid of that distorted, ridiculous history that has been taught through movies and through the notions that came through by what happened 200 years after first contact. So the best way is to let's get back to the truth and start talking truth and stop introducing fiction, and then we wouldn't have to explain those conflicts to children who think that those conflicts existed or those contradictions existed. They didn't exist before 1492 is all I'm saying.
Thanks, Duke. I know, I love it. Yes, I love it. I always think it's good to revision history through Indigenous perspectives, so we get a little more truth happening. So I think what we'll do is we'll end it for today. It's been a great afternoon.
I hope I didn't scare everybody away with
No, I think we wish we had all afternoon. I think that's what we're wishing, that we had more time together, Duke. Miigwech, Marcy, for our time together. Duke, do you have any last thoughts before we go?
Well, I'm really delighted that so many people want to hear another side of the other side of the ledger, and I'm always happy to be invited to express the lens that I live and I come from, and thank all of you out there for taking time out of your lives to have a few moments to see that there is another lens that is functioning and operating and alive and well in downtown Toronto.
So I thanks everyone for coming out. We will send up some follow-ups from this for our next times together, and also to get some feedback. The feedback's helpful because it's nice to hear your thoughts. Be safe, everyone. Be well, and take your learning from today and go forward in a good way. Maybe we could all say goodbye to Duke. Turn on your mics and your cameras and wish him a good day, and thanks.
Bye, Duke.
Thank you, Duke. Thank you very much.
Very much.
RP. Thanks, Duke.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Duke.
Thanks, Duke.
You're welcome. Miigwech.